Welcome to the Political Trenches, local government at work. We're making a bit of a detour this episode and talking about an important topic as we head into uncertain global times leadership. But before we get into our interview, we have some stories that we're going to be diving into. Ian, you're jet lagged. I'm car road lagged. How are you doing this fine, beautiful day?
Oh yeah, wintertime on the prairies, right? Travel is never exactly what you'd expect it's going to be, which is as we're recording this, it's the day before the Ides of March. So it's kind of, I guess, fitting that things are not going according to plan.
Of course. So we have some big stories that we're going to be diving into. So let's jump into our first story, which comes from CBC News Halifax. Nova Scotia's Municipal Affairs Minister is not ruling out new powers for Halifax Mayor. John Lohr said last month that so-called strong mayor powers have been discussed across the country. Quote, I can't say right now yes or no. I'll just say it remains to be seen, end quote, Lohr said at Province House when asked whether the PC government would bring in legislation on strong mayor powers. Now, it's unclear what strong mayor powers could look like in any future Nova Scotia legislation and whether the province would follow Ontario's lead. Ontario Premier Doug Ford brought in legislation to grant strong mayor powers to Toronto and Ottawa in late 2022, expanding them to dozens of municipalities in 2023, with the aim of cutting red tape and getting housing built more quickly. Now, Ian, I went back in our back catalog and found the episode where you and I first spoke about these so called strong mayor powers. We anticipated that this might be coming down the line for other provinces. Are you surprised that the idea of these so called strong mayor powers after 3 years are now being tossed around more publicly in other provinces?
Well, first of all, Chris, what I heard you say is we're smart. So let's just start with that. And I
Ah,
appreciate it. No, I'm not the least bit surprised. I don't think it's a good idea. And the provincial ministers that have the responsibility for local government will talk to one another. We'll gather from time to time as well. So what happens in one province or territory may well evolve into other provinces and territories as well. I don't like strong mayor powers particularly. I think what it does, though, is it moves local governments to being more like the provincial government or the federal government in the way they operate. And the fact that the provinces might be interested in that might just be a notion around proximity rather than best practice.
now, how might this so called mayoral authority with these so called strong mayor powers impact collaboration between municipal councils and their mayors? Because we talked about it a little bit in depth, but as this starts to grow a little bit more, we're hearing stories from Ontario that these strong mayor powers have had some conflict within their councils, whether it be the mayor doing something that council may not like or one councillor may not like. Do you think this could happen, or do you think Nova Scotia is going to look at the best practices and see what they should and shouldn't do?
Well, first of all, I don't think conflict or disagreement on a municipal council is a bad thing at all. I think that enlivens and enriches the discussion. However, that said, I think once we start removing the notion that all members of council and mayors or members of council are inherently like first among equals, if you like, and we start making them literally a little bit different, it's that's I'm sure Orwellian gets thrown around quite a lot, but in Animal Farm, we heard about all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And that to me is kind of what's happening with the push towards strong mayor powers. Some of the mayors who are being provided them in Ontario, for example, want them, some don't. Some councils are pushing back on them as well. So there's not universal admiration for these things. And it's a bit of Pandora's box. Once this thing has been opened, I think it's very difficult for it to close. So it's been opened in Ontario. Nova Scotia is cracking the lid a little bit. There are likely other provinces watching as well. And so there's the giving and the taking piece. The province is the one who controls municipalities in many ways. So they can do what they like through their municipal acts. How the mayors react and use those powers for good or for evil is kind of up to the individual mayor and their personality, their situation, all of those sorts of things. You see that a little bit expressed in the article to which you refer. When the mayor was asked about strong mayor powers, he kind of deflected the question a few times. And I mean, that's a political answer, but ultimately he's kind of right in that he has no say over how this happens or whether it happens. So why fall on one side of that argument when really the mayor has no say in pro or con, going ahead or not going ahead? They have to deal with whatever that provincial outcome is.
As this entire episode's about leadership and leadership styles, how have you heard stories? Because I was trying to do some research about this, but have you heard stories where the strong mayor powers have sort of, and I hate to sort of say this, but bit the mayor in the behind when it comes to using these strong mayor powers? Because it seems like there are, like you said, there's people on both sides of the fence who have been legislated that they get these strong mayor powers but refuse to use them. There are ones who said they're not going to use them but then end up ultimately using them. Have you seen stories where these strong mayor powers have come back and bit the mayors in the back end?
It's a little tough to say in terms of long-term effects, just because even Ontario hasn't been using them for very long, particularly outside the major cities. So I think the ramifications of that are going to wait to be seen. However, if we look south of the 49th, strong mayor powers are pretty common in the United States. And with those powers comes things like the hiring and firing of city managers or city solicitors, the presentation of a budget without consultation with the rest of council. So in those sort of situations, I think it is rife for the possibility of, if not abuse, then certainly creating increased levels of conflict between the mayor and other members of council when they're supposed to be all on the same side.
We're going to turn to our second story, which comes from CBC Vancouver. Vancouver Councillor Rebecca Bligh has been kicked out of the ABC Vancouver Caucus. Bligh confirmed on social media last month that she had been, quote, ejected from the party. A statement from ABC President Stephen Mullner announcing the ousting said, quote, while Bligh remains a Vancouver City Councillor, it has become clear that as she is not aligned with the shared priorities and team-oriented approach that defines ABC Vancouver, end quote. The statement goes on to say that Bligh, quote, is not a core value fit, end quote, with the party. Vancouver School Board Chair leaves ABC party as well and goes independent. Quote, rather than working with Caucus to find common ground and advance solutions, she has chosen to put her own views ahead of the collective work of the team, said the president. Ian, what does this situation reveal about party discipline and individual representation in municipal politics as we're both from Alberta? Alberta heads to this party politics system in both Edmonton and Calgary.
I don't know, this is my negative show, Craig. I don't like this either. So,
Did you just call me Craig? Can I just say that you
I
just
think I
called me
did. I
Craig?
apologize.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sure there will be lots of Craigs who are happy to be called Chris later on. So to me, anyway, this is perhaps one of the foreseeable but unintended consequences of party systems in local government. Vancouver, of course, is one of the very few in the country that actually uses it. There were some troubling statements in what you said as well, because city council is elected by citizens, regardless of party affiliation. Together, the members of city council comprise Team Vancouver in this case, or wherever it happens to be. And when somebody is saying, quote, the party president said, quote, she's chosen to put her own views ahead of the collective work of the team. That's troubling to me because by team, I presume this party president is making reference to the party caucus rather than to city council or Team Vancouver. And she was elected, as were all other members of council, to look after the broad long-term interests of Vancouverites. But that's Team Vancouver. It's not Team ABC that's Vancouver. And the priorities that stated by the party president, to me, are backwards from what serves citizens best. What's best for the party and its re-election may not, in fact, be best for Vancouverites or for any other municipality where there are parties present. So in this case, the fact that the city councillor has no longer being a team player within the caucus doesn't necessarily mean that the city councillor is not a team player on Team Vancouver. She just may see a misalignment between what the party promotes and what she sees as best for the city of Vancouver.
So when researching this story, and I should put a conflict of interest on the table right now. I know Rebecca. I've had lunch with Rebecca. She is currently the Federation of Canadian Municipalities president. I had a car ride with her up in Yellowknife while I was there for the NWTAC convention. So I know her, and I am a little bit close to this. But I want to turn this into a little bit of a different angle on this story.
Sure.
Um, When we first talked about this party politics, and again, we're going back into the old repertoire here of what we've talked about coming home to roost. We talked about who was actually going to be controlling these elected officials. Is it going to be council or is it going to be a party? Is it going to be people behind the boardroom? When I saw this news release come out, I read it in full. Mayor Sims, who is the quote leader of the party's name wasn't over. It was the party president, who is an unelected official from
Right.
city council. When I speak to people in Edmonton, when I speak to people in Calgary, that is their concern is who's actually going to be pulling the strings. You talk about the votes that are going to be happening in the best interest of the community of Vancouver here. Is this literally just foreshadowing what Calgary and Edmonton's about to go through with
Oh boy, I hope
unelected
not.
officials literally pulling the strings of their elected officials?
Certainly could be. That's again, we were makes reference to this in our last story too, about how the entities that control local governments are the provincial parties, which are provincial governments, which are used to the party system. They're used to behind closed doors caucus meetings where we come out into open session and have performative votes. The city of Vancouver has had issues with that through its council and its park board over the last little while anyway. So this just seems to be another reflection of what's going on here. I mean, sure, the parties, if they're homogeneous and whipped and doing what they're supposed to do as a party, they're effective in getting their platforms completed. But they're not broadly reflective of necessarily what the community wants. They might be aligned, but that's not necessarily the case because they're probably interested in making sure that their members get reelected rather than, and if that's aligned with what's best for Vancouverites, great. And if it's not, it ends up being populist and then there is some long-term damage as well. Alberta is, with Edmonton and Calgary, is still in the very early stages of this, but I don't see a whole lot of difference once it matures here versus what we would see with parties, again, south of the 49th or in other parts of the country as well.
We're going to turn to our final story, which comes from the Calgary Herald. Most of Cremona, Alberta's council has resigned after Municipal Affairs Minister Rick McIver cited dysfunction with the village's governance and appointed an official administrator to oversee it. Now, early March, three of the village's five councillors stepped down, saying that the appointment of management consultant Doug Lagore to supervise council rendered them unable to carry out their tasks. They also noted the majority of council voted last month to oppose Lagore's presidents as official administrator for the village of 461 people located 78 kilometers northwest of Calgary. Quote, we feel our votes and voices are powerless and ineffective despite being duly elected officials voted in by the great people of the village of Cremona. End quote, states a March 3rd news release signed by councillors Autumn Schmidt and Eric Martin and Mayor Robert Reed. Quote, the elected council is ineffective and unable to carry out its electoral duties, end quote. This means the town council has lost its quorum with the three resignations. Supporters of the councillors who resigned noted they were elected in two by-elections over the past year and were determined to turn around the village's subpar governance. In his February 26th letter to Reed explaining the decision, Minister McIver acknowledged that stance, saying a January 27th meeting made clear those councillors were adamant, quote, that the reports of dysfunction are one-sided and biased and that the council is gaining the trust and respect of the community, end quote. Ian, I'm cautious to ask you this because you are and have been an official administrator, but I think I need to. Were the resigning councillors justified in stepping down after the appointment of an official administrator, or should they have remained to advocate for their positions on council?
Sure. This is, and you were provided some qualification to the last story. I need to provide some here. We have worked in Cremona over the course of this term, so I'm a little bit more familiar with this situation. My suspicion is, first of all, I know Doug Lagore quite well, and my suspicion on this is this really isn't about him as a person or as a professional. It's more about quote unquote interference by the provincial government in local affairs. So, I mean, Mr. Lagore is well known and experienced. I have taken on this role too. I found when I was doing it that the advice or counsel that I was getting from the elected officials who had to step back from their roles was still really helpful in making decisions. Now, the official administrator role, de facto council, they are appointed to avoid making long-term policy decisions that are going to change the municipality. Essentially, their job is to get the place back on the right foot, get council fully constituted, and then turn the authority back to council so that they can make those policy decisions for the people that they live with. The official administrator, of course, doesn't live there, comes and goes. But so I think it's important for the OA official administrator to have as much authority as they need, but only to exercise that as necessary. So I mean, I can certainly understand the perspective that the comment that we're essentially taking authority away from local people and putting it in the hands of somebody who's remote. Where you stand depends on where you sit. There are several people who are saying that it's taking away the power of council. And my suspicion is there are probably just as many people who are saying this council isn't on the right track and they needed some sort of a shock to the system, which this OA role may well take on. The province is paying attention, and in a thing like this, their goal is to get the place back to being a fully functional, effective local government. And of course, October 20th of 2025 this year is the election for all Alberta municipalities. So we're also running up against, if not deadlines, then certainly we're now into the nomination period as well. So we've got to kind of throw that on top of all of this as well.
I should just clarify, not all municipalities in the province of Alberta head to the polls on October 25th. Just a little side clue out there.
Semantics.
Summer villages do not. They go in July. So I'm just putting that out there right now.
Thanks, Chris. I was the expert till now.
Oh yeah. I want to pick up on something you said there.
Sure.
This may be semantics. This may be just the councillors wanting to control the council and move forward. But you and I have talked at length about a certain municipality here in the province of Alberta, which has sort of tainted the role of an official administrator, which is Chestermere, where the province comes in and appoints a official administrator when they see quote unquote dysfunction. Now, this is what the province is saying that's happening in the little village right now, and I was at the recent Alberta Municipalities some spring municipal leadership conference in Edmonton last 2 weeks ago. And I heard that there is concern that the province may be looking at the dysfunction that happened in Chestermere and trying to root out the dysfunction that other municipalities are going in on. Now, I'm not comparing apples to oranges because Chestermere and Cremona are two different municipalities, and there's probably a lot more things that are going on differently. But one being tainted with what happened in Chestermere has got to have municipal leaders across Alberta with their backs up against the wall going, are you coming in thinking that we're another Chestermere, or is this going to be completely an over the top, like above board audit or look at what's going on, quote unquote, dysfunction? What's your thoughts?
Well, Chestermere is a bit of a special case. Anytime a municipality like that makes news across the country for the reasons they were, is problematic. So in that case, I think the minister had seen what was going on in Chestermere with city council, with city administration, and people playing fast and loose with the rules of the Municipal Government Act, and said, we need to do something about this. The legislation is the same for Cremona as it is for Chestermere, so it doesn't really matter. And in both cases, it seems that the province has said council is not doing the job essentially the citizens hired it to do, and we need to step in and get it back on the right track. In Chestermere, they replaced both the city manager and they replaced council until a by-election could be held. And by all accounts, Chestermere is now operating really well. We've had an opportunity to engage with them quite a bit since this has all happened, and it's worked well. And in Cremona, it's a replacement of council. The CAO is still in place. So it's a little bit different that way. I can understand the nervousness of it all, but there are, 350 something municipalities in Alberta, and we are talking about one major case and now a second in Cremona. I've been an official administrator, I think 3 times over the course of this last 4-year term. So it's not like it's a particularly rampant problem. And there are definitely lessons to be learned in all of these cases.
And now we're discussing with Catherine McCook about leadership. Welcome to the Political Trenches, local government at work. Today, we are here to unpack the key issue of leadership in this new world, global and local order. To discuss this, we are joined by Catherine McCook, who is a city councillor, leadership and performance coach, and board member of the Rise Up Society of Alberta. With a background in criminal justice and training in interviewing and interrogation, she brings a sharp, multidimensional approach to leadership and system change. As the founder of the Elan Project, Catherine empowers women, supporters, leaders, and consults organizations on fostering people-first cultures that drive engagement, innovation, and long-term success. A fierce advocate for women in leadership and workplace well-being, Catherine believes in disrupting the status quo for good, breaking down entrenched barriers, reshaping leadership norms, and redefining success in ways that prioritize people over rigid hierarchies. With that, welcome to the Political Trenches, Catherine.
Hello, welcome. Thank you.
I'm going to start off. I'm going to start off with a quick, simple question. How did the project come about, Catherine?
Well, I think it was, a combination of things. So as you said, my background is in interviewing and interrogation, and I worked corporate in security and investigations, and so that's very, rigid, and interrogations are one thing, but I found where my strengths lie, and in being on city council as well, is creating those connections. And when I went out to stores or when I did audits and stuff, that was really my strength. And I figured out that I was essentially coaching people without actually coaching. And then I ran into a lot of difficult leaders who were not willing to bend or learn, and a lot of leaders who actually didn't know about leadership and learn about leadership, because I think too often we do that. We throw people into positions and we don't equip them with the tools to be successful in some of those positions, and leadership is one of them. So then that kind of lead me down the leadership and performance coaching path, and the socioeconomic consulting piece a little bit, because as we're seeing today, people's socioeconomic status and all those factors impact businesses, employees, customers. And so I think helping businesses have an understanding of that is important.
Where'd the name come from? What's the significance of Elan in all of this?
Yeah, so that one, I was really thinking about what do I want it to encompass? And Elan is really about like momentum and movement. And I think that's part of it. So it really essentially is a movement. I want organizations and leaders to think about people and bring humanity back into leadership, and support more women into leadership, and just in workplaces in general as well, make them more friendly to a variety of people, not necessarily just the structures that have been built for men by men. So yeah, I felt that really kind of encompassed it.
So there's some irony in two men interviewing you about this, I suppose. It's just kind of funny on this. If we get back to it a little bit more, I was looking at the website, of course, and you've said in there you want to create a space where women can be empowered and inspired to achieve their full potential by providing them with the tools, resources, and support they need to succeed in all aspects of their lives, and is rooted in how they define success. Can you tell me a little bit what that means to you, all of that?
So I think, and I went down this path myself as well. Society has kind of shaped what success should look like. It's often financial. That is success for you. Or you have a family and then now you have financial success. And I think for a lot of people, and especially women today, that is shifting. Success to them might be, having good mental health and having good supports around them, and just being able to kind of live a life of leisure, or a more simple life, and not necessarily always, striving for that and doing being a girl boss or whatever it may be. And I think for a long time, so many women were pushed in that direction because we felt like we had to. But now women are redefining what success looks like for them. I think honestly, a lot of people are, not just women. But obviously for myself, I focus a lot on women, but I think that's a big part for a lot of people, especially as we have so many pressures today and everyone's kind of in that rat race and you're on the hamster wheel and so many people are like, how do I get off? And so just helping people understand that you can and that success can look different for everyone and that's okay.
The ranks, albeit slowly, the ranks of women among local government leaders are growing across the country. Are you seeing any parallels between that and maybe growth in your own business? Are you getting any of your women colleagues reaching out to you to ask more about what you're up to?
Yeah, for sure. I do have more women colleagues asking. I think too, there is, with what we're seeing down south, we are seeing a little bit of hesitation with people, I think, especially women. And especially a lot of the hesitation is around the online piece, how to handle some of that criticism. As we know, in local government, in government in general, women often bear the brunt of the harassment, and it's often more severe in the comments that they get, and more prevalent. So they get it a lot more often. So I think definitely more women are looking to have an understanding of what they're getting into before they get into it. So I'm certainly always open and happy to talk with any women who are looking to get into politics, because I think really having an understanding from someone who's been in it is really important. And that goes back to that coaching piece, coaching even through the transition of becoming an elected official. That is a shift and that is a transition. And it is not always an easy one. And for local government, especially a lot of smaller cities, you're part-time. And so a lot of women, a lot of candidates have full-time jobs in addition to that. So now you're juggling your council duties, your full-time job, and if you have a family, you have that as well. So it's that transition piece and understanding how to balance all that.
You talk about how the Elan Project is needed at this time in the world. And you also spoke in your conversation with Ian about reshaping leadership norms and redefining success within today's society. What does a truly people-centric model of leadership look like in 2025? Because I can imagine there might be someone in Nova Scotia listening to this and saying that this is what they define leadership as and what they define people-centric leadership as. What does Catherine McCook, the founder, the CEO of the Elan Project, define as truly people-centric leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest part is thinking about people first. When big things happen as it pertains to leadership or leaders need to make decisions, we automatically revert to the policies, the numbers, the data, which is all obviously very important. These are all things we have to consider. We can't dismiss that. But what gets lost in a lot of those conversations and a lot of those leadership practices and how leadership is very hierarchical and, very structured and intense, we lose how do these decisions impact our people? And I think we're seeing that through organizations as well as through society, that some of these decisions that are made through strictly policy lenses and strictly, financial lenses, we're losing how all of this shakes out and then actually impacts people. We're seeing some of the highest rates of burnout in organizations. And, the lunchtime webinar isn't cutting it. So we need to think about how some of the decision making we're doing is impacting the people in our organizations. And so it's bringing that back to the focus, and it's through all of your interactions. So even creating, psychological safety where people feel comfortable coming forward and saying, I don't agree with this. This might not be okay. And this is why. And instead of, getting your hand slapped or saying, I don't need to listen to that because I'm the leader or I'm the manager or whatever it may be, it's about, okay, tell me more about that. Let's talk about that. I had a client who, they were struggling with someone that they had just recently brought on, and they said, we've given them all the training, we've done everything we could with them, and they aren't getting it. So I think we're just going to need to cut them loose. And my first question was, well, have you sat down and had a conversation with them? And they said, well, yeah, like we've been like, why aren't you getting this? And I'm like, no, actually talk to them. How are things going with you? How are things going on with you outside of work? Because so much of what happens sometimes outside of work impacts people in their jobs, and we pretend like it doesn't. And so they had the conversation, and sure enough, there was other things, and they were able to, with some help, they were able to kind of work through it. But it didn't even dawn on them to have that conversation as to like, are things okay? So I think some of that is really important.
You've spoken openly about the toxicity that is in social media and how you have to just turn off your cell phone at the end of the night. And municipalities, as this is the municipal show, I'll sort of throw in the municipal question here. Municipalities have been struggling with the changes that social media has had on their culture in their output of information. We are seeing more and more municipalities leaving social media networks like X. We are seeing more and more municipal leaders, whether it be men and women, leaving social media altogether. If you want to have a conversation, email me. If you want to have a conversation, let's meet for coffee. But we're not having that conversation on social media anymore. What strategies do you recommend and have you seen put into place for leaders to actively combat that toxicity while not losing I'm a proponent against getting off social media, and I'll be the first to admit that social media has been the downfall of our civilized society. Again, send your emails to Chris Brown, not to Ian or Catherine. How do we actively combat that toxicity and not lose that outlet where so many people seem to be on, but want to be that place where people can get that town square information from? Because if we start losing those people, then we're sort of throwing up our hands, aren't we, as leaders saying, okay, we've given up and we want to go back to the 1980s metric where we put the notice in the newspaper and that's all we can do as leaders because that's where the most civilized discourse is.
Yeah, great question. I think part of it is, I mean, some of it goes back to that psychological safety piece, and even within your own councils. So you have to be comfortable enough within your own council to be able to speak up and to be able to deal with some of that. And I think you should stand up for your colleagues as well. I think too often right now within councils too, it's, me versus you, rather than, listen, we're on a council together, and while we may disagree on certain policies and how we implement certain things, we're still on this council together. So instead of going out to the public and, maybe even further perpetuating the me versus you piece, let's stand up for your colleagues. If somebody is calling someone out, stand up for your colleagues. That's inappropriate. You should not speak like that to my colleagues. And I think something I've done, and you kind of mentioned it, Chris, is, I don't think you can totally remove yourself from social media if you're in the public eye, if you're in local government. You have to still at least see what's going on, see what people are talking about. I've mostly tried to engage people offline in the sense a little bit, where if I see that they're really fired up on a certain issue, I will message them directly and say, hey, I see that, you're really upset about something about this. Sometimes getting together one-on-one can be very beneficial. I'd love to meet for coffee, or if it's more convenient for you, we can jump on a quick phone call, and try and engage them that way. Just pull them out of that kind of town square mob mentality kind of area, because that's where the productive conversations happen. That's where you can really say, this is what's happening. And, sometimes residents will change your mind, and sometimes you'll change theirs as well. And sometimes, a lot of the times, they're not willing to engage. And that's their decision as well. But I think you still have to have that willingness to engage. It's just in a different way now. And it's not necessarily jumping on the long thread that is, piling on about certain decisions that are made. I think it's trying to pull them off of that to have an understanding as to, okay, what are truly your pain points here? Because sometimes when you start to talk to people as well, the initial thing that they're angry about is not necessarily what their entire pain point is. So it's having those conversations. And luckily, locally, most of us, we have that ability to do that. I think provincially, federally, it's a little bit harder, but in local government, we still have that opportunity. So we have to do it. But you have to call out the dysfunction at the structural level as well. Leaders have to be willing to make kind of those structural changes, whether it's through, audits or process overhauls or whatever it may be. And then we have to refuse to align ourselves with people who fall into that really toxic culture. You need to stand up and say, this is not okay. I'm willing to engage with you, but not like that.
I'd like to close with just one more question, if we can, Catherine. That looking kind of into the future, you're clearly passionate about all of this, and some of the terms that you're using around this, like human-centric or authentic leadership, and even just now about some of the fear of change and things like that. How do you transfer that passion onto other people in order to kind of keep this ball rolling or to make it pick up some momentum?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it is stay curious. We have to ask people the questions. We have to, so for myself, when I come up against people who, don't like DEI and think that we need to move into a meritocracy, really just starting asking questions around that. What does that mean to you? That's one of my favorite questions, is what does that mean to you? Because, people don't often realize that a lot of these things mean something different to everyone. And so if we can start to get general understandings as to what some of these things mean and the impacts that they have, then we'll be able to move through this a little bit better. But I think just always talking about it, asking questions, staying curious, and just hoping that people are still open to those conversations and open to understanding. That's a big piece. Yeah.
Catherine, Ian and I both want to take a moment and thank you so much for sitting down with us and talking about leadership and the Elan Project. Thank you so much. And for those who want to learn more about the work that Catherine's doing, you can visit the show notes and find the website and the social media links for Catherine's Elan Project. So please check that out. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you so much for having me. I very much appreciate you guys and all the incredible work you guys do with the podcast and your work.
Our full interview with Catherine McCook will be airing next Monday. We'll be right back. Ian, another great episode, another great conversation. Catherine seems to know a lot about the truly human aspect of leadership. How do you feel like today's episode went?
I agree. I thoroughly enjoy every time I have an opportunity to interact with her. She used the terms like authenticity in her interview, and to me, she's one of the most authentic local government people I've ever had the chance to interact with. So I love doing that.
I agree wholeheartedly. Now we are back, hopefully in the swing of things. We got a lot of great episodes lined up over the next few months. So please be sure to tune in. But what does Strategic Steps have coming up in April? Still going out to Newfoundland and Labrador?
Still, yeah, April the 8th, St. John's, Newfoundland, as part of the PMA, Professional Municipal Administrators Conference. We are doing a session on incivility and abuse, specifically focused on administrators before they do their their annual conference. So yeah, that'll be fun. We have, I'm heading out there. Our VP Craig Pollitt will be there, and we've got some other people coming along with us as well. So that'll be really nice too. Cheryl Spencer Morley is one of them, actually, who's going to talk about the communications aspects of everything.
Awesome. I'm going to be down in Lethbridge on the 26th of March for the South Grow Initiative, which I'll be emceeing, and then we are back out to Saskatoon in April for the SUMA convention, and then we're off to Haines Junction, Yukon at the end of April for the Association of Yukon Communities. So We're going to be trying to put these out as regular as possible. We both have a lot of traveling to do, so we apologize if they're not as regular as they are, but we're going to try to stick to a regular schedule every Monday. So thank you so much, Ian, for being back in the political trenches with me. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Ditto, I enjoyed it as well. Thanks so much, Chris.